The story of the Silk Road begins more than 2,000 years ago, during the reign of the Han Dynasty in ancient China, around the 2nd century BCE. At this time, China was emerging as one of the most advanced civilizations in the world. Its emperors ruled over a prosperous land, known for innovations in agriculture, science, and art. Yet one product stood out above all others: silk. This shimmering fabric, delicate yet strong, became a treasure that would connect nations, inspire kings, and spark the creation of one of history's most influential trade networks. The origins of silk itself stretch back even further into the depths of Chinese legend. According to one tale, Empress Lezhu, the wife of the Yellow Emperor, accidentally discovered silk when a cocoon fell into her teacup and unraveled into a thread of incredible strength and beauty. From that moment, silk production, or sericulture, became a closely guarded secret of the Chinese people. For centuries, no outsider knew how it was made, making silk more valuable than gold beyond China's borders. By the time of the Han Dynasty, silk had become not just a luxury item, but also a symbol of China's wealth and power. Envoys sent westward by Emperor Wu of Han sought alliances against nomadic tribes such as the Xiongnu. On these missions, they carried silk as gifts, impressing foreign rulers and opening the first pathways of cultural exchange. What began as diplomatic outreach soon grew into commerce. Merchants saw opportunities, and slowly the threads of the Silk Road were woven. Geography played a defining role in shaping this network. The Silk Road was not a single paved highway, but rather a series of interconnected routes that snaked across mountains, deserts, and plains. From the imperial capital of Chang'an, caravans traveled northwest through the treacherous Gobi Desert and over the Taklamakan, a sea of shifting sands, known as the Desert of Death. Others passed through the soaring Pamir Mountains and the rugged terrain of Central Asia. Despite the dangers, from bandits to brutal climates, these routes became the arteries of an international trade system. Caravans, often consisting of hundreds of camels, became a familiar sight along these dusty paths. They carried not only silk, but also jade, porcelain, and lacquerware, while returning with exotic goods like glassware, gemstones, ivory, and fine horses from distant lands. Middlemen, such as Sogdian traders of Central Asia, played a vital role, acting as cultural and economic bridges between East and West. With every exchange, the Silk Road grew, linking civilizations that had once been isolated from one another. But the Silk Road was never just about goods. It was also about people, ideas, and ambitions. Early travelers included envoys, merchants, monks, and adventurers, each leaving behind footprints that carried stories of their cultures. Through their journeys, the Silk Road evolved from a commercial route into a cultural highway. The foundations laid in this early period would later allow not only treasures to flow, but also religions, philosophies, languages, and technologies that changed the course of world history. The birth of the Silk Road was therefore much more than the beginning of trade. It was the start of globalization long before the modern age. The seeds sown in the deserts of Asia and the courts of emperors would grow into a network that transformed economies and connected humanity. By establishing this artery of exchange, the Han Dynasty unknowingly set the stage for an era of cultural interconnection that would shape civilizations for centuries to come. As the Silk Road expanded, it transformed into the lifeline of ancient global commerce. Though silk gave the route its name, it was far from the only treasure to pass along its dusty paths. The Silk Road became a moving marketplace where goods, ideas, and ambitions met. From the bustling Chinese capital of Chang'an to the wealthy city of Samarkand, from desert oases to the golden domes of Constantinople, the Silk Road was a grand stage for exchange that would shape the destiny of nations. Silk itself remained the most iconic and prized commodity. Its smooth texture, shimmering beauty, and rarity made it highly coveted in distant lands. In Rome, senators and nobles draped themselves in fine silk garments, despite the Senate at times condemning the fabric as too luxurious and morally corrupting. Yet demand only grew. Silk became a status symbol, one that spoke not only of wealth, but also of connection. But the caravans did not only carry silk. From the east came porcelain, jade, lacquerware, and paper, items that astonished those who had never seen such craftsmanship. From India and Southeast Asia, merchants brought exotic spices like cinnamon, pepper, and cloves, which transformed cuisines and even medicine in distant lands. Central Asia contributed horses of remarkable strength, prized by Chinese emperors for their armies. From Persia and the Mediterranean came glassware, silver, olive oil, wool, and fine textiles. Along the way, even more goods were exchanged. Ivory from Africa, furs from Siberia, and precious stones from India and Persia. Each region contributed its own treasures, but the value of the Silk Road lay in more than the goods themselves. It lay in the interdependence it created. A Persian glassmaker depended on a Chinese silk merchant, just as a Roman aristocrat depended on Indian spice traders. Entire economies grew around these routes, with cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar becoming thriving hubs where caravans could rest, trade, and replenish supplies. These cities became melting pots of cultures, where languages mixed and markets buzzed with diversity. The trade also brought immense wealth. Empires taxed the goods that passed through their territories, filling treasuries and fueling conquests. Caravan leaders and middlemen, especially the Sogdians of Central Asia, became wealthy and influential, acting as cultural and economic bridges. To be a trader on the Silk Road was to hold a ticket to fortune, but also to danger, for bandits, deserts, and political instability constantly threatened the journey. In many ways, the Silk Road was the first example of global supply chains. A piece of silk that began its journey in China could pass through the hands of dozens of merchants before reaching a noble in Rome. Spices grown in India could season meals in Persia, while glass made in Syria might find its way into Chinese palaces. This interconnectedness was unprecedented, and it turned the Silk Road into a network that was far more than commerce. It was the very heartbeat of ancient globalization. The treasures of the Silk Road dazzled kings and merchants alike, but their true significance lay in the connections they created. The movement of goods brought prosperity and power, yet it also carried the seeds of cultural transformation. Alongside silk and spices, new ideas and religions began to travel exchanges that would soon prove to be even more influential than gold or gems. While silk, spices, and gold dazzled the markets, the Silk Road's most enduring legacy was not material wealth, but the exchange of ideas and cultures. This ancient network became the world's first great information highway, carrying religions, philosophies, technologies, and art across thousands of miles. One of the most profound exchanges was the spread of Buddhism. Originating in India, Buddhism traveled north along the Silk Road into Central Asia and China. Monks journeyed with caravans, carrying scriptures and teachings. They established monasteries along the route, offering safe havens for weary traders and becoming centers of learning and translation. Over time, Buddhist art and architecture flourished in places like the Dunhuang Caves of China, blending Indian spiritual ideas with Chinese artistic traditions. Islam, too, found pathways along the Silk Road. From Arabia and Persia, Muslim merchants and scholars traveled eastward, bringing not only their faith, but also advancements in science, mathematics, and medicine. Cities like Samarkand became vibrant Islamic centers, where mosques rose alongside bustling markets. Meanwhile, Christianity also spread eastward, carried by missionaries and traders into Central Asia and even parts of China. Nestorian Christian communities thrived for centuries in these distant regions, leaving behind traces of their presence in inscriptions and art. Beyond religion, countless cultural elements flowed along the road. Languages mixed, foods blended, and artistic styles fused into hybrid forms. Paper, an invention of China, traveled westward and would eventually transform Europe, enabling the spread of knowledge on a scale never before seen. The Silk Road, therefore, was not just a commercial corridor, but a cultural bridge. It connected civilizations in a way that reshaped beliefs, arts, and knowledge, leaving an intellectual and spiritual legacy that endures to this day. For centuries, the Silk Road thrived as the lifeline of commerce and culture. But no empire, no road, and no trade network lasts forever. By the late Middle Ages, the great arteries of the Silk Road began to weaken, slowly giving way to new paths of exchange. Several forces contributed to its decline. The Mongol Empire at first gave the route a golden age by uniting vast territories under a single rule. This created relative safety for traders, allowing goods and ideas to move more freely than ever before. But after the Mongol Empire fractured, political instability returned. Wars, shifting alliances, and collapsing dynasties made many parts of the Silk Road unsafe. Another major factor was the rise of maritime trade routes. By the 15th century, European explorers had begun navigating the seas, establishing faster and more direct connections between East and West. Ships could carry far more goods than caravans, and sea routes were less vulnerable to bandits or desert storms. The once thriving overland Silk Road gradually lost its dominance. The Silk Road also carried unintended consequences. Alongside goods and ideas, it became the pathway for disease. The most devastating was the Black Death, which spread across Eurasia in the 14th century, decimating populations and weakening trade networks. Yet, even in decline, the Silk Road left a legacy that still shapes our world. It was the first great experiment in globalization, a network that proved humanity's deep desire to connect, exchange, and learn. It created a foundation for cultural blending, economic interdependence, and the spread of knowledge that continues in our modern world of trade and communication. The caravans may have vanished, but the Silk Road remains not as a physical path, but as a symbol of how exchange can change the course of history.